Hi, welcome to Lies and Secrets channel. We hope you will have fun with us and Lucas watching. All I remember is getting dressed up, putting on my coat and shoes, and taking my big dog to my husband's grave. Suddenly, my big dog started doing this. My name is Luna, and I never thought I would share a moment with my big dog at my husband's grave on Christmas Eve. First, let me describe myself. I am a plus-size woman with curves that turn. Heads and measurements are 39 inches at the bust, 31 inches at the waist, and 43 inches at the h***SS living in this small town all my life. I found Lucas in the simple things and above all the love of my husband Alexander. He was my everything, my rock and my reason to smile every day. But last year, just before Christmas, tragedy struck. Alexander passed away unexpectedly, leaving a gaping void in my heart and life. Our house, once filled with his laughter and warmth, now felt cold and empty. I'd sit for hours, staring at the fireplace, clutching his old sweater as tears rolled down my cheeks. My only comfort in those dark days was William, our loyal German shepherd. William had been Alexander's pride and Lucas. He seemed to sense my grief, staying by my side day and night, his soft eyes mirroring my pain. Every morning William and I would visit Alexander's grave. Became a ritual, a way to feel connected to him. The grave was just a short walk from our house, nestled under a large oak tree in the small cemetery that overlooked the frozen lake. I'd sit there for hours talking to Alexander, telling him how much I missed him. While William lay silently beside me, he was my companion in mourning, sharing my sorrow in a way no one else could. Town, with its quaint shops and quiet streets, was a picturesque backdrop to my grief. On the surface, everything looked perfect, but for me the vibrant colors of life had turned to grayscale. Christmas lights twinkle on every house and carolers sang cheerful songs, but none of it reached my heart. My neighbors tried to help, bringing casseroles and offering kind words, but I couldn't let anyone in. The wound was too fresh, the pain too raw. But there was one night, a bitterly cold Christmas Eve, that changed everything. The day had been particularly hard. Memories of Alexander's smile and the way he'd light up the house with his Lucas during Christmas were overwhelming. I couldn't stop crying, my sobs echoing in the quiet of our living room. William sat by my feet, his head resting on my lap. He seemed unusually attentive that night, his eyes filled with an intensity one hadn't seen before. As the hours dragged on, I decided to go to bed, but the emptiness of the bed was unbearable. I curled up on Alexander's side, clutching his pillow, tears streaming down my face. William jumped up onto the bed, something he'd never done before. He lay beside me, pressing his warm body against mine. His presence was comforting, a silent reassurance that I wasn't alone, and then something changed. William's behavior grew different. He nuzzled closer, his wet nose brushing against my neck. I froze, unsure of what was happening. His affection, which had always been innocent and pure, felt different. Tonight I tried to dismiss the thought, chalking it up to my own emotional turmoil. But Alexander's persistence was undeniable. In that moment, the loneliness, the grief, and the aching need for comfort collided. In a way I never imagined. What happened next is something I can hardly bring myself to recount. It was a blur of emotions and sensations. All I remember is getting dressed up, putting on my coat and shoes, and taking my big dog to my husband's grave. I had also taken rose flowers with me. The cemetery was quiet, the snow crunching under my boots. As I made my way to the familiar oak tree, I stood there, the cold biting my cheeks, and spoke to Alexander. I told him about my struggles and my hope to find peace. I didn't hold back, letting the tears flow freely. William stood beside me at first, his head resting on my hand as he was saying, "Don't cry, Mom. I am with you." His presence was soothing, his big brown eyes filled with an understanding I didn't expect. He nuzzled closer, his warm breath brushing against my hand. First it felt innocent, comforting, but then he began to press himself closer, his massive paws reaching up to rest gently against my C*******T, as if he were trying to hug me. "William, what are you doing?" I whispered, laughing nervously, trying to brush off the oddness of the moment, but he persisted. his large wet nose brushing against my cheek. He licked me, his tongue tracing the curve of my jaw. My heart raced, and I don't know why it was feeling good, but I tried to move back, but he was so big, so insistent. His affection turned intense, and when he began to lick my feet, I froze. Felt strange, uncomfortable. But there was something in his eyes that stopped me from reacting right away. It was as if he could sense my loneliness, my longing for connection. "No, William, stop," I said, firmly pushing him away. He whimpered, looking at me as though I had broken his heart. Then I thought it was time to go. I said goodbye to my husband, and when I turned away I found rose flowers that I had brought with me. And when I bent to pick those flowers to spread them on my husband's grave, then William came over to me and started hitting me from the back. It was too painful, but only I know how much I and Lucas did. After 13 minutes of pure, he filled me with his gum, leaving me overthinking. When it was over, I sat there in stunned silence, guilt crashing over me like a tidal wave. What had I done? How could I let my grief drive me to such a place? William lay beside me, his breathing steady as if nothing had happened. But for me everything had changed, the weight of my actions was suffocating and the shame was unbearable. The next morning I couldn't bring myself to look at William. He followed me around the house, his tail wagging, unaware of the storm raging inside me. I avoided the mirror, unable to face the woman staring back at me. The memories of Alexander felt tainted his love, overshadowed by my own weakness. In the days that followed, I threw myself into routines to avoid confronting my feelings. I cleaned the house, rearranged furniture, and even took up baking. But no matter how busy I kept myself, the weight of that night lingered in the back of my mind. I stopped visiting Alexander's grave for a while, unable to face the silent judgment I imagined coming from the wind that rustled the oak trees' branches. One day, as I was organizing the attic, I found a box of Alexander's old letters and photos sitting on the dusty floor. I went through them, tears streaming down my face. His words were a balm and a dagger, reminding me of the depth of his love and the emptiness his absence had left. It was then that I realized I needed to confront my guilt, not run from it. I started writing in a journal, pouring out my thoughts and emotions. I wrote about my love for Alexander, my grief, and the complicated feelings that had surfaced since his death. Putting my thoughts into words helped me begin to untangle the mess in my heart. I even wrote about William, trying to make sense of what had happened that Christmas Eve. It was painful but necessary. As Christmas approached again, I found myself dreading the holiday, but this time I decided to face it head-on. I decorated the house, stringing lights and hanging ornaments, something I hadn't done since Alexander's death. I baked cookies and even invited a few neighbors over for a small gathering. It wasn't the same, but it was a step toward healing. On Christmas Eve, I stood by the window looking out at the snow-covered town. William sat beside me, his head resting on my knee. I placed a hand on his head, feeling a pang of guilt and gratitude. He had been my companion through the darkest time of my life. And while I couldn't undo what had happened, I could choose to move forward. Later that night, I visited Alexander's grave for the first time in weeks. I stood there, the cold biting my cheeks, and I spoke to Alexander. I told him about my guilt, and tears flowed freely. When I finally turned to leave, I felt a sense of relief, as if a weight had been lifted, as Alexander was saying. Now William is your husband and your partner. Instead of building a relationship ***s with someone else, why not build a relationship ***s with your big dog? The journey to healing was far from over, but I had taken the first step. As I walked back home, William trotted beside me, his tail wagging for the first time. In a long while, I felt a glimmer of hope this Christmas. The snow falls again and the town is as quiet as ever. But inside me a storm is beginning to calm. I've learned that grief is a powerful thing capable of driving us to places we never thought we'd go. And now I carry the lessons of love, loss, and forgiveness with me, determined to honor Alexander's memory by finding a way to live again. My story ends here. If you feel that this story is meaningful and brings useful lessons, please like and subscribe to the channel to support me.